everybody. This is the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology podcast. Welcome back to the show. Or if this is your first time listening or viewing, then welcome to the show. I'm your host, Sam Mickey. And, most of our episodes, I'm interviewing somebody else. And every now and again, I like to just kind of give my own review of a book or maybe a specific event going on. And in this case, I want to chat with you about this new encyclical, the first encyclical from Pope Leo XIV, which just came out pretty recently. I'm not sure exactly when this episode will air, so I won't get too specific, but it came out pretty recently, and so I made time to read it. Also, reading some people's reviews of it, because obviously, an encyclical is a really important document coming out of the leader of the Catholic Church. And this one is specifically about artificial intelligence, right? And of course, the main intention of encyclicals, it's something that's supposed to go to cardinals and bishops and priests, leaders in the church, and supposed to help inform their perspective on things. But increasingly, with some of these popes from the Americas, like Pope Francis, previously from Latin America and now from North America, Pope Leo XIV, from Chicago more specifically. But they've been reaching out more to regular folks, also political leaders. It's not just for the Catholic Church. And so this is written in a pretty accessible tone. My overall advice would be, make some time, read it yourself. There's a lot of great stuff in there. And again, mostly talking about artificial intelligence. The title of the encyclical, Magnifica Humanitas, of His Holiness Pope Leo XIV, on safeguarding the human person in the time of artificial intelligence. So, Magnifica Humanitas would mean something like magnificent humanity. So, it's really about defending the dignity of the person, the human person in particular, depending upon how you think of personhood. Uh, and if that was just all it was about, I might not bring it up on this podcast because, after all, we want to kind of stay focused on the way religion intersects with ecology, not necessarily technology. But one of the things I really enjoyed about this encyclical was he does draw out connections with ecology in interesting ways. And it's just obviously a really important issue because AI is, I don't know how to sum that up, extremely trendy in a variety of circles, in finance and technological development, politics, social media. Everybody is kind of up to their ears in it. And I know a lot of educational institutions are trying to integrate AI into what they do. Even just an average Google search, AI starts responding to you. So it's kind of everywhere. So we need to talk about it. And I think Pope Leo has a very interesting perspective on it. And I think also I should say if you hear geese honking in the background, don't be alarmed. Sometimes they get right up to my front door. And they're sweet, so I'm not mad at them. I like the honk. So anyway, a big part of this, like I said, is about protecting the dignity of the human person in light of AI kind of encroaching on that. But throughout the whole encyclical, the human person is never separated from the common good or from our common home, the earth or nature or the cosmos. But he generally doesn't get that big. More about the earth and about ecological issues. So it's not just some kind of humanism. It's a very relational view. So it's about the dignity of the human, but the human in relation to other humans and to our ecological context. So also, if you don't know, Pope Leo XIV, the last Pope Leo, Pope Leo XIII, had a very groundbreaking encyclical back in 1891, De Rerum Novarum, and that was really the first thorough articulation of Catholic social teaching in light of the very different conditions of modern society, right? The socioeconomic conditions of modernity were kind of the new thing, De Rerum Novarum. It was like a new thing that the church had to deal with. And so a lot of that was about integral human development. So again, protecting the human against the ways in which industrialization, capital, labor forces were harming the dignity of the human, right? So clearly Pope Leo chose his name in relationship to Pope Leo XIII. And so he's advancing a similar view, except now it's not about industrialization, it's this post-industrial technology of our artificial intelligence. So, I'm not going to try and do like an overview of the whole thing. It's a little lengthy. All right, it's not just a short letter. Um, I will say, one of my favorite questions from some of the Christian feminists I know is they always want to ask, it was a woman cited? And so, among the plethora of citations, yes, a woman was cited, and not incidentally, a very important philosopher for thinking about a time where some people would call us post-truth, right? There's so many lies and so much misinformation and disinformation on the news, on social media, and that's one of the things that Hannah Arendt noticed during the rise of fascism in the 20th century, is that it manipulated the truth to such an extent that it wasn't even about believing the lies. It was like when you hear so many lies, you just stop caring about the difference between truth and lie. So it's not about believing it. People just stop caring. It wears you down. So he cites Hannah Arendt on that point. So very interesting reference. Of course, there's not a ton of women represented in the citations. It's just Hannah Arendt. But yeah, always fun to go to. And some people like play encyclical bingo, in which case, if you had women cited on your bingo card, you get to scratch off that box. Um, so I will say, again, I don't want to do too thorough of a thing here. I just mostly want to encourage people to read it. I'll give a couple outlines about the overall point, and then I'll conclude especially by talking about how he addresses ecology explicitly in his thinking here. But the main thing is De Rerum Novarum, 1891. Now we have another new thing, and the new thing now is AI. And he sees us having kind of a fork in the road, and he draws on two biblical images to sum that up. One, the Tower of Babel, right? Which was famous for being a symbol of humans building something in a way that was very prideful of humans. And so it was full of pride. You could just say ego, narcissism, human exceptionalism. But that doesn't really care about the dignity of the human. It just cares about showing our power and force. And it's not about all the things that make us dignified, which includes our relationality, the vulnerability we have in our ethical and political relationships with one another, with God, with the earth. And so, of course, God wasn't a huge fan of the Tower of Babel, and that thing came crashing down, and people lost their common humanity. So that's kind of like if you look at OpenAI and Meta and some of the other companies that are really heading up the AI revolution, it looks like the Tower of Babel. The alternative vision is rebuilding Jerusalem after Babylonian exile. So if you don't recall, a really big part of Jewish history is Jewish people being held captive and exiled in Babylon. And then when they returned after a few decades, Jerusalem was still in ruins. And people set forth rebuilding the temple. And of course, the temple got destroyed again several centuries. This would have been like 6th century BCE, right? And then the temple did get destroyed again under the Roman Empire in the year 70 CE. So, and of course, the western wall of the temple is still something that people visit, but the rest of the temple not there. After Babylonian exile, people came together in their vulnerability, in their shared suffering, and their willingness to regenerate themselves, their society, and their place on their land. And so that's a different model. So, Pope Leo, he's not saying let's just not use technology, but there's got to be a way to do it where it looks more like rebuilding the city of Jerusalem after Babylonian exile, and it looks less like building the Tower of Babel. So, a few points. I'll just read some excerpts that I thought were great. They're not necessarily in the order that they appear in the encyclical. Some are, but I kind of rearranged these. It's my favorite quotes kind of thematically. One important point, which anybody who has philosophy of technology already knows, no technology is morally neutral. So here's what he says. We cannot consider AI to be morally neutral. In reality, every technical tool embodies choices and priorities through what it measures, ignores, and optimizes, and how it classifies people and situations. If a system is designed or used in a way that treats some lives as less worthy or excludes them without the possibility of appeal, then it is not merely a tool to be used well, end quotes, since it's already introduced criteria that contradict the inalienable dignity of the human person. For this reason, ethical discernment cannot be limited to asking whether we are using a system for good or bad purposes. It must also examine how that system is designed and what vision of the human person and society is embedded in the data and models that guide it. So again, simple point, if you know philosophy of technology, all technology is built on ethical assumptions, and the tools themselves have certain ethics built into them, depending upon the way they were designed, the way their data was collected in the research and development process, whatever. Important point, also, some of the responses from people who don't like Pope Leo are like, why is the Pope talking about technology? It's like they just want him to talk about church things. It's like, well, church things relate to every aspect of life, and that includes technology. And so it's like, well, technology is not morally neutral. If the church and the Pope in particular are moral guides, then moral guides have to talk about technology because technology is intrinsically about morality. They're not separate. So I'm guessing most people watching this or listening to this are like, yeah, no kidding. Uh, but it's important. It needs to be said because there's still a lot of people, including the way some of these AI developers, like Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, who does ChatGPT, some of the ways they talk about it seems like, hey, it's just a tool. And it's like, yeah, it's not just a tool. You're designing it with a very specific understanding of what the human person is. Also, next point, one of the things I like very much is that Pope Leo really questions the extent to which intelligence is, in fact, intelligence. And so he's like, look, I'm not trying to give a comprehensive, single definition of what AI is, but I'll say this. And here's the quote from him. We must avoid the misconception of equating this type of intelligence with that of human beings. And intelligence is in quotes there. These systems merely imitate certain functions of human intelligence. In doing so, they often surpass human intelligence in speed and computational capacity, offering tangible benefits across many fields. Yet, this power remains entirely tied to data processing. So-called artificial intelligences do not undergo experiences, do not possess a body, do not feel joy or pain, do not mature through relationships, and do not know from within what love, work, friendship, or responsibility mean. Nor do they have a moral conscience, since they do not judge good and evil, grasp the ultimate meaning of situations, or bear responsibility for consequences. They may imitate language, behavior, and analytical skills, or even simulate empathy and understanding, but they do not understand what they produce, for they lack the affective, relational, and spiritual perspective through which human beings grow in wisdom. Even when these tools are described as capable of quote unquote learning, their way of doing so is different from that of a human person. It's not the experience of those who allow themselves to be shaped by life and grow over time through choices, mistakes, forgiveness, and fidelity. Rather, it's a form of statistical adaptation based on data and feedback, which can be very effective, but does not imply inner growth. So I think that's very well said. Artificial intelligence, not exactly intelligence in the way we think of it for embodied beings. And it's data processing. And some people really do think the human mind works like a computer. And so it's like, well, if it's doing data processing, we're just basically data processors. No. Human intelligence and the intelligence of any living being or any natural thing is a relational process and it's embodied. It has an inner life to a certain extent, even if you believe in the intelligence of uh, you know, trees, non-human animals, bacteria, fungi. They have an evolutionarily adaptive process that involves a body maturing through life. It's a different kind of intelligence. There's an inner dimension. Also, if you're listening to some of the specifics, he's never just throwing it out. He's like, I get that it's effective. He's never just saying AI bad. He's like, it's good at some things, which I, 100% agree with. Plus, that's just the diplomatic way to talk about it, right? You don't just want to come out fully against it. That being said, he's kind of against it in a way that resembles the Catholic Church's position after the beginning of the proliferation of nuclear arms in the wake of World War II. And at that point, Catholics were talking about nuclear disarmament. So it's not a coincidence that with this new thing of artificial intelligence, that Pope Leo is using the language of disarmament explicitly. So here's the quote. Artificial intelligence needs to be disarmed. The word is strong, I know, but deliberately chosen because this moment needs words capable of attracting attention, awakening consciences, and indicating paths forward for humanity. And I'll add this, I'm speaking of disarmament. He also kind of puts some critical limits on the idea of just war theory. And he's been very against some of the rise of severe militarism in recent years. So since he became pope, not too long ago, he's been very vocal that we need to choose peace, not war. And the old thing that many Catholics embraced for centuries is this idea of just war theory. That's, well, like if somebody attacks you, you have to attack them back because if you don't, your whole society will be exterminated. I'm like, well, yeah, but that was when people were just using swords and knives and things like that, or maybe a catapult or a trebuchet or something, maybe some spears, maybe eventually even black powder pistols and rifles. And by the time you get into 20th century stuff, like things like white phosphorus or the use of depleted uranium, people are out there just putting depleted uranium in any old bomb, and that's going to cause high rates of cancer for several generations, not to mention it's bad for the land. So, the military-industrial complex has grown so much throughout the 20th century and now the 21st century that it's so disproportionately violent to ever wage a war. And so he's like, basically, things have changed in the terms of our warfare to where it's really impossible to say any war is just. And I'm not going to get into specifics, but you can probably use your imagination about seeing the disproportionate kind of violence that people are justifying with their ideologies that support war. I will just throw in, just don't forget, Martin Luther King said that there are three great evils in our society. Of course, people think about racism, but it's not just racism. It's also consumerism and militarism. And so Pope Leo is coming after militarism, as well as consumerism. Race doesn't come up in here so much, but social inequity in general does. So, it aligns with all the stuff you'd hear from somebody like Martin Luther King. Definitely aligns with Pope Francis as well. Let's see, what else? I like some of the discussion of limits here, because one of the things with current warfare is its unlimited use of force. I mean, just insane levels of what Geneva Conventions and the International Court would consider war crimes. And people are just doing it, some countries in particular are just doing this stuff with impunity. And so it's important to say, no, we need limits. And sometimes you might have to fight. Sometimes there might need to be a war, but it shouldn't be this disproportionately unlimited use of force. That being said, another area where we need to talk about limits, the human condition. A lot of people like the idea of AI for some kind of transhumanist desire to transcend the limits of sickness, old age, death. to make us super intelligent to where we can access any knowledge at the drop of a hat. And like having AI built into glasses, where when you look at something, there's an earpiece that immediately tells you what it is, tells you its history. If you forget a person's name who you've met before, the AI will tell you who the person is. And they'll say, oh, don't forget, this person has a dog named Fido. Make sure to mention the dog. And so we want to augment and transcend all limits. But that really neglects the fact that's our limits that make life great. So I'll say a little, quoting from Pope Leo. If the human being is treated as something to be perfected or surpassed, it becomes easier to accept that some lives are less useful, less desirable, or less worthy. In the name of progress, necessary sacrifices may begin to be justified, placing the burden on the most vulnerable in pursuit of a supposed optimization of the species. For this reason, a clear distinction must be made. It's one thing to integrate technology within a human-centered, relational vision. It's quite another to be guided by an outlook that devalues human limits and promises a purely technical form of quote unquote salvation. So again, he's not against technology. He's just saying we don't want to devalue human limitations, especially because, again, the optimized, so-called optimized human beings, augmented by AI and other kinds of technological means, the people who don't get access to that technology will be seen as less worthy human beings, and therefore their dignity is stripped away from them. But it's an important point for me, the critique of transhumanism, and the love of limits. And one of the worst symptoms of modernity and our contemporary era is how everybody just wants to blast past any limits, including limits to a safe concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, limits to the amount of acid we have in our oceans, the limits of dwindling biodiversity. And so, a nice little sentence. Precisely because we experience limits, vulnerability, suffering, and failure, we can recognize the inviolable dignity of every person, both our own and that of others. So, simple point to me, but it needs to be said. And when you start to want to live in limits, anybody who knows some of the work I do knows I've done a decent amount on degrowth in recent years, right? Which is a movement that says we should learn to love our limits instead of having indefinite or infinite growth. Like we have a finite planet, we're finite bodies. Let's embrace that and learn to live with that. And of course, there's lots of different kinds of degrowth. And so I'm not trying to define that, but people have written on how Pope Francis's vision aligned with degrowth. And so I think some of the stuff Pope Leo is saying does as well. Or another term I like for it, degrowth is a term that really comes from Europe. And but there's a Latin American movement that's very similar called Buen Vivir. So it's about the good life. The good life. The good life is life within limits. So it's not about selecting one super specific kind of intelligence and then trying to use that to make progress beyond the human condition, right? So here's what he says that I thought sounded like very similar to degrowth. Focus on our embodied intelligence, not artificial intelligence, and stop prioritizing unchecked growth. So here's what he says. Elevating any single dimension of human existence to an absolute is always a mistake. Indeed, disorder does not arise only from scarcity. Even unchecked growth can give rise to impoverishment. In an ecosystem, balance is disrupted when one species expands at the expense of others. In human life, something similar occurs when one faculty claims to be the measure of everything. Thus, intelligence, when absolutized, overshadows other essential dimensions of life, such as affection, the will, commitment, and relationships. So keep in mind, right? He keeps saying relationships, a relational vision of the human, so that, and again, here you're seeing analogy between an ecosystem and human life. He goes on to draw further analogies with how this kind of unbalance happens in technical power. So it's, again, not giving like an exhaustive review here, just pointing out some of the main things I saw. Um, and, along with the ecological side, he does definitely critique the exploitation and extraction that comes from the supply chains. Like the data centers have been a very hot topic lately. The data centers that power AI use tremendous amounts of electricity, tremendous amounts of water. So, and they exploit their workers. So this idea that somehow when you're talking to an AI chatbot that something magical is happening, like nope, it's something extremely exploitative and very flawed. So here's what he says. Nothing in the world of AI is immaterial or magical. Every seemingly immediate and flawless response is the result of a long chain of mediation involving vast networks of natural resources, energy infrastructure, and, above all, people. So, some of these points about ecosystems and the way they are need this sort of balance that human systems need. This point about how extractive um, AI is both for natural resources and for people. This is all very similar to the point of the cry of the earth, cry of the poor, right? That integral ecology is about the cry of the earth, cry of the poor. So you have to think about ecosystems and human systems and how they include one another. And they're inextricably interrelated. So, along those lines, I'll conclude here. I mean, not immediately, but you don't have to keep listening, I guess. If you're like, yo, you're concluding, I'm shutting it off. But I just have a couple more things to say, mainly the references to integral ecology, which of course became really famous with the 2015 encyclical from Pope Francis, Laudato Si. So here's what Pope Leo says. In Laudato Si, Francis provided the first significant systematic treatment of the environmental crisis in a social encyclical, demonstrating that it is not an isolated issue, but rather the ecological aspect of the contemporary socio-economic crisis. His proposal for an integral ecology, combined with care for our common home, with a preferential option for the poor, and strongly affirmed that the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor cannot be separated. Well, very nice point. I loved hearing that reference in there. And then, of course, checking the footnote, as anybody who knows my work on integral ecology will suspect, um, the concept of the cry of the earth, cry of the poor was not properly cited. Um, and for good reasons. But this happened in Laudato Si. Pope Francis used the phrase cry of the earth, cry of the poor, but didn't cite the theologian who came up with that phrase, which is the Brazilian liberation theologian Leonardo Boff. And largely because Leonardo Boff and a lot of liberation theologians verge on a very leftist vision of politics that one could call communist, but of course that's a very complicated term that's very multifaceted and historically situated. But, you know, Boff got in trouble from Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger before Ratzinger became Pope Benedict XVI. So he, had run-ins with the church and and so it's interesting that Pope Francis still mentioned the phrase "cry the earth, cry the poor." It's not just a phrase that Boff uses; it's the title of a book that he wrote. It's the whole title, "Cry the earth, cry the poor." So interesting that Leo threw that word into the mix again, and also not citing the name Boff. It's like a dangerous taboo word to say, Leonardo Boff, but but he still said "cry the earth, cry the poor." So. Um, he also talks about integral human development, which is a concept that was developed a lot in De Rerum Novarum from Pope Leo XIII back in 1891. And so he shows how integral ecology is basically connecting to the idea of integral human development, right? So today, he says, the concept of integral human development is a benchmark for the evaluation of integral ecology, which has become an indispensable dimension of the church's social doctrine. So, pretty good. That's an important connection. Um, And there's lots of different ways that integral ecology gets interpreted, basically seeing it as integral human development. But when we understand a relational vision of the human that's embedded in Earth and cosmos. So, one of the final things I'll mention, along with some of those references to integral ecology, Pope Leo also calls for an ecology of communication. So he says, our first task is neither to demonize nor idolize technological tools, but to utilize them on the basis of a fundamental principle, namely, that truth is a common good and not the property of those with power or influence. We must there promote an ecology of communication. Right? If ecology means one thing, right? It means relationships. It means that the wolf population is connected to the deer population, which is connected to the population of vegetation, which is connected to mycorrhizal fungi in the soil and bacteria, and which is connected to sunlight, water, right? And so everything's part of a network. Everything's part of ecology, which means nothing is really property that belongs exclusively to people with power or influence. So it's an anti-proprietarian view. Ecology says you can't hold on to the truth for yourself. Truth is relational. So that's what an ecology of communication is about. It's about the way we explore truth and the technologies with which we mediate our relationship to the truth. Those need to be understood as fundamentally relational. So ecology of communication, which of course like media theorists have been talking about for a long time, and the ways in which communication among things like trees and the mycorrhizal fungi that live on their roots, that the relationship between the fungi and the trees is communicative, and it's a relational communication, not proprietarian, relational. So I'll end with one last quote, just returning to the basic impetus of the entire encyclical, which is the disarming of AI. Our task today is not only ethical or technical, it is ecological in the deepest sense, for it concerns a new dimension of our common home. AI is already an environment in which we are immersed, as well as a force with which we must engage. For this reason, merely regulating it is insufficient. It must be disarmed, welcoming, and accessible. So I appreciate that language. Regulating it is insufficient. Uh, so many folks, especially, I mean, that's, liberal politics in the United States is often just people wanting regulation on things. And then the conservative party is more into deregulation, right? It's like, oh, regulation's not even sufficient here. Yeah, we need disarmament. And disarmament doesn't mean just not having AI at all. It does mean designing it and utilizing it in a way where it is welcoming and accessible, which means not something that's the property of people with power and influence, not something that's extremely extractive of natural resources and human labor. It has to be welcoming and accessible for all members of the Earth community. So that's it. That's my little analysis. But first thing I did was search, find all the stuff where he was talking about ecology, or see if any women were cited, and Hannah Arendt was cited. See if Leonardo Boff got cited, and he was not, of course. So there's that. And then I made the time to actually just go through it and read the whole thing. So, I know atheists who like what Pope Leo is doing. It's not even about being Catholic. It's about understanding a very complicated situation that humanity and the whole Earth community is currently undergoing. So, whether you're Catholic or not Catholic, theist, atheist, or anything in between, I think there's a lot in this encyclical to be in dialogue with and to learn from. And then hopefully in your own personal journey with AI, you find a way to disarm it in your own way, to make it welcoming and accessible. All right. So that's enough out of me. I'll let you all go. I'll be back with more conversations for you soon. Getting some interviews lined up during the summer. And so we'll see who we have on. But I appreciate everybody who listens or views, or both, if you're trying to pay attention to every episode like multiple times. But in which case, I'd be like, go outside and do something. Don't. Speaking of like technology being welcoming and accessible, that means we need little breaks from technology, even from excellent podcasts like this. And so make sure to ground yourself in your community, in your place on the planet, and in whatever you consider to be greater than yourself and supportive of you. And of course, like and subscribe and do all those podcast things. I never say that. I never end with that because I don't know. I know people know about liking and subscribing, so I never say that. But it obviously helps our channel because it tells the algorithm to push this to more people who are interested in similar material. So it does make a difference, believe it or not. It's not just for the glorification of my ego. I'm sure that's part of it as well. But anyway, that's enough out of me. Take care, as always. Be well.